North America and Europe, we often talk about a vocation crisis. But I think rather than a vocation crisis, what we're struggling with is a crisis of commitment. Hi, I'm Father Kevin Zubel, and I'm a Redemptorist missionary stationed in Baton Rouge. And I'm continuing the series on the sacraments of hope with a sacrament that, of course, is very special to me, the sacrament of holy orders. And by holy orders, we talk about the ordination of deacons, priests, and bishops. But when we talk about the priesthood, or we talk about the ordained ministry, we often talk about, in very stark terms, we look at what a struggle it is to find men who respond to a call to serve in ordained ministry. And while the permanent diaconate continues to grow, we struggle to find priests to replace those who are retiring and passing away. And so we often hear this language of a vocation crisis. And so often we shake our heads and say, well, what do we do? How do we inspire men to respond to the call? And I think it's important to remember it in those terms, responding to a call. Because sometimes when we say a vocation crisis, it makes it sound like that there aren't vocations. But if we understand the vocation to being the call itself, then if we believe that this is Christ's church and that it's Christ himself who gathers us to celebrate the sacramental life, to receive him in the Eucharist, then we have to believe that he is calling men. And he's calling plenty of men to serve in these ministries, to serve in ordained ministry. So maybe the vocation isn't the problem. It's the failure to respond. I think the question isn't so much what are the things that get in the way. I think the question is whether or not we are forming newer generations in how to live lives of commitment. Because I think what we see happening in ordained ministry is similar to what we see happening in the other sacrament of vocation, and that's the sacrament of matrimony. People are delaying matrimony, and many people who do get married find that they can't sustain their marriages. And over a half, even among Catholics, end in separation or divorce. So what I think the crisis is a crisis of commitment. And so when we commit to something, it's when we hand our lives over for something greater in the service of something good, for more than ourselves. And I think for several generations, what we've communicated, especially to young people, is that your responsibility is to create your own meaning in life. That your job is to find out what are your passions, what are your talents, and then do whatever it is you need to do to enjoy those. And on one level, there's nothing really wrong with that. We all have been given gifts. We've all been given talents, and we're called to cultivate them. We're called to enjoy the beauty of this world. We're called to share that beauty with others. So there's nothing wrong with wanting to realize your talents. But the question is, we can't, or the issue is rather, that we can't give ourselves something we don't have. As long as it's up to us to make our own meaning in life, then we'll always be limited in how far our life can go. And what Christ calls us to something greater. The reign of God is at hand, but yet we don't experience it in its fullness. And so that's so much of what the sacramental life of the church is about, is to bring about the reign of God, not just in terms of eternal life, but here and now. That the peace, that the prosperity, that the wholeness that Christ promises is something that we can enjoy and experience in our own time if we are open to him and his word and the Spirit of God. And so commitment is when we open ourselves to saying, well, I'm part of a broader story. I'm a part of a bigger picture. And I think that is what is essential to ordained ministry, is to not try to see ordained ministry as some way of living out a certain set of talents or gifts, but to truly respond to a call to accompany others in the church in bringing about the fullness of the reign of God day by day. And not just in the great liturgies and the great sacramental celebrations of the church, but in daily life. So where does that lead us? Well, I think ordained ministry is really a call to share in the mission of Christ, but in a way that draws others to realize how their gifts and talents can be brought about in the service of Christ and his reign. One of the inspiring texts for those of us who are ordained into the priesthood comes from the first letter of St. Paul to the Corinthians in chapter 4, where he says, "Think of us in this way, as servants of Christ and stewards of God's mysteries." For me, I can't think of any greater definition of the life of a priest than to be a steward of God's mysteries. When I was first ordained, I always felt that I was the exact wrong person for everything that I was called to. I'd be called to someone's bedside as they were dying, and all I could think about was, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. There's something in those early years and early days of priesthood where we feel very much beneath the moment, that these powerful moments in the lives of families or in the lives of individuals that we're called to, the confessions that we hear, the blessings we're asked to give, that we look around and say, surely someone else should be here. Surely this is beyond what I'm for or what I can do. But very soon on in my ministry, I've learned that, we as priests are almost always beneath the moment. We're always almost never worthy. We're almost never fully equipped to respond with the greatness that the moment calls for. But to be a priest is to understand that, no, our responsibility isn't to be the mystery itself. It's to be stewards of the mystery, to accompany people, and to never lose sight that we are also on our pilgrim journey, that we're in need of forgiveness, we're in need of healing, that we struggle with our own doubts. And so I think when we ask the question, how can we inspire others? How can we inspire young men to respond to the call that we're confident that Christ is issuing in the hearts of so many around us? And I think it's to help understand that what they're committing to is not some personal privilege or some personal set of gifts, but that what they're committing to at first is just simply to enter into deeper discernment, to understand how Christ calls his priests and his ministers to serve in the community. I remember in my last days of a professional life, as I was preparing to enter formation, was still uncertain of whether this is something I wanted to do or was able to do. And my pastor at the time invited me after Mass to come up with him into the sanctuary of the church. And he said, "Kevin, so many people come to the church and are inspired sitting in the pews and looking at the beautiful altars and the artwork and the beautiful things that we put together to show the glory of God and to give him praise." And he said, "I think for those in ordained ministry, the first thing they have to discover and ask themselves is the church most beautiful sitting in the pews and looking towards the altar? Or is the beauty of the church seen more deeply, standing at the sanctuary and looking out into the faces of the people?" And he says, those who feel closer to God by seeing the faces of those gathered in prayer probably have a call to ordained ministry. And so that's my suggestion to families all around our country, is look to the young men that you know, those who are struggling with their sense of identity, struggling with their sense of place in the world, and help them to dream bigger. Help them to encounter what the reign of God means and what it can bring about in this world. I don't think there's a crisis of vocations. God is calling many to the ordained ministry. But will we have the hearts and the courage to commit not only to God, but to one another, to commit to be stewards of the mysteries, to break open the Word, but above all, to believe what we teach and to live what we believe.